Adriano Leite Ribeiro was born in Vila Cruzeiro, one of Rio de Janeiro's most dangerous favelas, a place where dreams often vanish long before they have the chance to grow. The narrow alleyways, the sound of gunshots at night, the constant fear of violence. That was the world Adriano opened his eyes to. His childhood wasn't built on comfort or stability. It was built on survival. His father, Almir, worked tirelessly to provide for the family, doing whatever jobs he could find. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence, steady, protective, and warm, became the foundation of Adriano's life. His mother, Rosilda, fought every day to keep the household together, stretching what little they had to make sure her children were fed and safe. Their love didn't erase the danger around them, but it gave Adriano something just as powerful: belief. Vila Cruzeiro was unforgiving. Many of Adriano's childhood friends were lost to drugs, crimes, or violence. He saw things no child should ever see. Every day he walked through the favela knowing that one wrong turn could lead to tragedy. But through all the chaos, there was one place where the world finally made sense to him: the makeshift fields where kids played barefoot football until the sun disappeared. On those dusty grounds, Adriano found joy. He found freedom. He found possibility. Even then, he was different. Bigger, stronger, and more explosive than the other kids, he could strike a ball with force that stunned everyone around him. Neighbors would stop to watch the young boy whose left foot sounded like a cannon every time it met the ball. And soon word spread through the favela. There was a kid in Vila Cruzeiro who might escape this place. But behind the early excitement was a reality that shaped Adriano's soul. His family lived in constant financial stress. His parents worried about keeping their children safe in a community controlled by gangs. And deep down, Adriano knew that football wasn't just a dream. It was his family's chance for a better life. Their chance to break free from a world that tried to hold them in place. Still, the emotional center of his childhood was his father. Almir believed Adriano had something special, something rare. He encouraged him, guided him, protected him, and Adriano absorbed every word, every gesture, holding onto them like a lifeline. Those early years in Vila Cruzeiro hardened him, strengthened him, and carved into him a fire that would one day terrify defenders across the world. But they also made him vulnerable in ways few ever understood. Before he became the emperor, Adriano was just a boy from the favela, running barefoot on broken streets, chasing a dream big enough to lift his entire family out of darkness. Adriano's rise from the favelas of Rio didn't begin with a scout or a formal trial. It began with a sound, the sound of his left foot striking a ball so violently that it echoed through the narrow corridors of Vila Cruzeiro. Neighbors would turn their heads wondering which grown man was launching shots like that, only to find a young boy grinning through the sweat on his face. Even before coaches noticed him, the community already knew. They sensed that Adriano was different, not just powerful, but gifted in a way that felt almost unnatural. He could dribble through rocks and potholes as if the ground beneath him didn't exist. He shielded the ball with a strength that defied his age, and whenever he took a shot, the ball seemed to warp through the air, rising with force and dipping with precision. The turning point came when he joined the youth academy at Flamengo. At first, coaches were stunned by his raw physicality. He wasn't polished, but he played with a kind of hunger that made it impossible to look away. During his first training sessions, he overpowered older defenders, sprinted through challenges with explosive bursts, and fired shots that left goalkeepers frozen. Then came the moment that sealed his destiny: a youth tournament match where Adriano scored a jaw-dropping free kick from an impossible distance. The ball didn't just go in, it tore into the net with such violence that the stadium fell silent before erupting in disbelief. Scouts whispered. Coaches exchanged looks. Everyone knew they were witnessing more than a talented prospect. They were witnessing destiny. Adriano wasn't simply good. He was inevitable. And the world of football was about to meet a force unlike anything it had ever seen. For all the power Adriano displayed on the field, his early journey was far from easy. Behind the booming left foot and the unstoppable physique was a young man battling pressures far heavier than any defender he would ever face. Flamengo's academy was a world of discipline, structure, and expectations, completely different from the chaotic freedom of the favela. And adapting wasn't simple. He struggled with the strict routines. He missed home. He felt out of place among kids who came from safer, wealthier neighborhoods. Most of all, he felt the weight of the dreams he carried. His family depended on him. Villa Cruzeiro looked to him as a symbol of hope, and his father, his hero, believed he could one day lift them out of hardship. That belief was both a blessing and a burden. Then came his first real heartbreak, an injury during a crucial youth match. A harsh tackle sent him crashing to the ground, and suddenly the boy who seemed indestructible felt pain sharp enough to shake his confidence. For days he feared the worst. What if the dream ended here? What if he couldn't provide for his family? What if everything he had fought for slipped away? Though the injury wasn't career-threatening, the emotional impact was profound. It was Adriano's first encounter with vulnerability, the first time he realized how fragile a footballer's future could be. And the doubts didn't end there. Some Flamengo coaches questioned his discipline. Others said he relied too much on strength and not enough on technique. A few even wondered if he lacked the emotional maturity to survive the pressures of becoming a star. But every criticism, every doubt, every moment of fear served only to intensify his determination. Adriano trained harder. He pushed himself past exhaustion. He vowed to prove that nothing, not injury, not environment, not fear, would stop him from becoming the player his father believed he could be. His mentality hardened, his hunger sharpened, and his path toward destiny accelerated. For a boy from Villa Cruzeiro, stepping into the San Siro felt surreal. The stadium was enormous, the expectations even larger. But Adriano didn't shrink under the pressure. He grew. The moment he put on the inner shirt, he carried himself not as a newcomer, not as a hopeful talent, but as a man ready to dominate. Still, his true explosion happened not in Milan, but during his loan spells at Fiorentina and Parma. It was there that the world began to understand what Inter had seen in him. Week after week, Adriano bulldozed through Serie A defenders, some of the toughest in football. He didn't just score goals, he terrified opponents. But the defining moment, the one that announced his arrival to the entire footballing world, came during a pre-season tournament with Inter in Madrid. Standing behind the ball for a free kick, he took 3 long steps back. The stadium waited, the whistle blew, and Adriano unleashed a left-footed missile that seemed to bend physics itself. The ball didn't dip, it didn't curve. It exploded, rocketing past the goalkeeper before he could even react. Commentators were stunned into silence. Coaches shook their heads in disbelief. Fans watching from home replayed the strike again and again, trying to understand whether a human being could really generate that much power. After that moment, everything changed. Inter Milan brought him back and unleashed him on Italy. Adriano responded with goals, assists, dominance, and a presence so overwhelming that defenders often doubled up on him just to survive a match. His blend of speed, strength, technique, and raw power made him look like a creation from a football laboratory. He became known across Europe as the Emperor, not as a nickname, but as a declaration of status. Adriano had arrived at the throne, and for a brief, brilliant stretch, it felt like nothing in the world could stop him. Nothing except the one thing football couldn't protect him from: life. At his peak, Adriano was more than a footballer. He was a phenomenon. The kind of player defenders feared before stepping onto the pitch, the kind of presence that changed entire tactics. Between 2003 and 2006, he reached a level of dominance rarely seen in modern football. And for a brief but unforgettable stretch, he stood toe-to-toe with the world's greatest players, and sometimes towered above them. What made Adriano extraordinary wasn't just his power, though his left foot was legendary. It was the complete package: the acceleration of a sprinter, the strength of a heavyweight, the technical ability of a Brazilian street legend, and the fearlessness of a man who had already survived far more in life than football could ever throw at him. At Inter Milan, he became the engine of the attack, a striker who didn't wait for the game to come to him. He hunted it. He could score from impossible angles, bulldoze through 2 defenders, or launch a shot from 30 yards that felt like a meteor hitting the earth. Crowds anticipated his touches. Commentators hesitated mid-sentence whenever he wound up his left foot. Everyone knew something spectacular might happen, and spectacular moments came often. He dominated Serie A with performances that felt almost unfair in their brilliance. He shredded defenses in the Champions League, and he became the centerpiece of Inter's ambition, carrying the club through matches with sheer force of will. But it wasn't just Italy witnessing the birth of a superstar. It was the entire world. When Adriano wore the Brazil national team shirt, he transformed into something even more powerful, a reflection of the country's footballing soul. He wasn't the samba artist like Ronaldinho, nor the elegant genius like Kaká, nor the clinical alien like Ronaldo. Adriano was something different, something raw, something terrifying. In the 2004 Copa America, he delivered one of the most iconic performances of his career. Brazil were seconds away from defeat in the final against Argentina when the ball bounced to Adriano inside the box. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. With defenders collapsing around him, he spun and struck the ball with a violence only he possessed. The shot ripped into the net. Brazil roared back to life, and in the penalty shootout, they completed the comeback. That goal wasn't just a moment of brilliance, it was a declaration. Adriano had arrived as the heir to Brazil's legendary lineage of strikers. His performances in the 2005 Confederations Cup only confirmed it. He destroyed defenses with a combination of elegance and brutality, earning the Golden Shoe and Golden Ball awards. At the time, many believed he would form an unstoppable partnership with Ronaldo heading into the 2006 World Cup, a new era of dominance for Brazil. Adriano at his peak wasn't simply great, he was inevitable. But what the world didn't see, what no amount of goals, trophies, or accolades could hide, was that his rise was happening at the same time his inner world was beginning to crumble. Behind the powerful strikes, behind the celebrations, behind the fearless persona, there was a man carrying grief too heavy for any athlete to bear. The fall was coming, and when it arrived, it would become one of the most heartbreaking stories football has ever known. The fall of Adriano didn't begin with a scandal. It began with a phone call. In August 2004, while Adriano was in Italy preparing for another season with Inter Milan, he received news that shattered the foundation of his entire world. His father, Almir, had passed away suddenly. The man who had protected him in the favela, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had told him he would escape the streets, was gone. That moment broke him in a way no injury, no criticism, no defender ever could. Teammates later recalled the sound of Adriano's scream when he heard the news. Raw, agonizing, the sound of a soul tearing apart. From that day forward, he was never the same. At first, he tried to keep going. He trained, he played, he scored goals that looked like glimpses of the old Adriano. But inside, he was drowning. The pressure of being Inter's star, Brazil's next great hope, and a global superstar collided violently with the grief he carried. Every time he looked at the stands, every time he heard the anthem, every time he celebrated a goal, he felt the absence of the man who taught him to dream. And slowly, Adriano sought refuge in the only escape he could find: nightlife, alcohol, and the chaotic energy of trying to outrun the pain. Milan, like many football capitals, offered endless distractions. And Adriano, heartbroken and emotionally fragile, slipped into them with increasing frequency. He began missing training sessions. His once terrifying explosiveness dulled. His coaches grew concerned. His teammates grew worried. The media grew ruthless. Rumors spread that Adriano was battling depression, but instead of empathy, headlines labeled him irresponsible, undisciplined, unfocused. Few understood that he wasn't a superstar losing form. He was a son grieving the loss of the person who defined his sense of purpose. Inter Milan tried everything: support programs, guidance, even interventions. But nothing could fill the void Adriano felt. Football, the sport that once saved him, now felt hollow. The field that once brought clarity now amplified his loneliness. His decline became public. His struggles became fodder for tabloids. His pain became entertainment for critics. Then came the moment that symbolized his collapse. In 2009, Adriano vanished from Inter without warning, returning to Brazil without telling the club. The world was stunned. Commentators speculated wildly. But the truth was painfully simple. Adriano was overwhelmed. He needed to go home, to return to the environment that shaped him, to breathe air that felt familiar. In Brazil, he joined Flamengo and briefly rediscovered sparks of his old brilliance. He scored goals that reminded fans of the Emperor. He celebrated with emotion. For a fleeting moment, it felt like redemption was within reach. But the battle inside him never went away. The grief, the pressure, the expectations, the trauma of losing his father. They followed him everywhere: Flamengo, Corinthians, Roma, Atletico Paranaense. Each comeback flickered with hope, but eventually dimmed under the weight of emotions too heavy to ignore. Adriano's downfall wasn't about scandals or discipline. It was about heartbreak, raw, profound, unresolved. The world saw him as a fallen star, but he was simply a man carrying a loss he never healed from. Adriano's comeback didn't arrive as a dramatic, triumphant return to Europe or a last-minute resurgence on the world stage. His journey back was quieter, more personal, defined not by goals or trophies, but by the struggle to reclaim pieces of himself that grief had taken away. When he returned to Brazil after leaving Inter, many believed his career was over. But in the comfort of home, in the neighborhoods, voices, and familiar rhythms of Rio, Adriano found something he had lost: connection. Flamengo welcomed him back, not as a superstar expected to save the club, but as a man trying to rebuild his life. And in that environment, he began to heal. For a brief stretch, Adriano rediscovered sparks of the brilliance that once shook Europe. His strength returned, his touch sharpened. And when he scored, the celebrations weren't about ego, they were about survival. His most emotional moments came not from spectacular goals, but from hugs, smiles, and the warmth of fans who saw the human beneath the legend. But the battle was never only physical. It was emotional, and those wounds were the hardest to mend. He moved to Corinthians next, where he fought through injuries and persistent doubts. When he scored a last-minute goal that helped the club secure a championship, the stadium erupted, not for the power of the shot, but for the story behind it, for the man who refused to stop fighting, even when the world had written him off. Later, short spells at Roma, Atletico Paranaense, and Miami United reflected a player searching, not for greatness, but for peace. Each move was an attempt to find an environment where he didn't have to pretend to be indestructible, a place where he could simply exist without the crushing expectations that once surrounded him. In time, Adriano stepped away from football altogether, not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked opportunity, but because his heart, bruised by years of grief, no longer carried the fire needed to survive the demands of elite sport. Yet his final chapter isn't a tragedy, it's a story of survival. He returned permanently to Vila Cruzeiro, the same favela he once dreamed of escaping, not as a failure, but as a man reclaiming his identity. He sought comfort in the community that shaped him, in the memories of his father, and in the simplicity he longed for during the chaos of fame. Adriano's comeback wasn't about trophies. It was about finding himself again. And sometimes that is the most meaningful comeback of all. Today, Adriano lives a life far removed from the global spotlight he once commanded. He remains in Brazil, close to the communities and streets that shaped him, choosing simplicity over fame and peace over pressure. To some, his story is one of unfulfilled potential. To others, it is a reminder that even the strongest warriors carry wounds no one sees. But to millions who grew up watching him, Adriano is something more profound, a symbol of raw, unfiltered humanity inside a sport that often demands perfection. His legacy isn't measured in numbers or records. It's measured in moments. Those thunderous goals that shook stadiums, the explosive runs defenders feared, the left foot that could turn a match with a single strike. It's measured in the emotional connection he formed with fans who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles. For kids from favelas across Brazil, Adriano proved that greatness can rise from the harshest soil. For fans worldwide, he showed that vulnerability does not erase brilliance. It reveals the human being behind the jersey. Even now, clips of his prime continue to mesmerize new audiences. Young players study his power, his technique, his fearlessness. And every time his name resurfaces, it comes with a blend of awe, nostalgia, and heartbreak. A recognition of a talent so immense it felt almost mythical. Adriano may not have written the ending the world expected, but he wrote an ending that belongs to him, one defined not by trophies, but by truth. And in the end, his story stands as a reminder of one powerful truth. Legends are not always remembered for how long they shined, but for how deeply they touched the world when they did.